Greeting you through the static of the airwaves. From the Great Plains, my name is Chance, and you're tuned in to the Mystery Report. I would like to welcome my fellow truth sleuths and mystery hunters to this channel update. No doubt you noticed the conspicuous absence of an episode last weekend, and I would like to assure you that this broadcast is still in production and will continue to be released, but due to some creative and personal considerations, our upload schedule will be changing. Starting in July, episodes will be released on the first and third Saturdays of each month. This will give me more time to dedicate to the production of episodes in order to ensure the quality is as high as I am able to make it. This is also due to the fact that I do work a full-time job outside of this broadcast, and have found it tough to maintain a weekly upload schedule with the time I have available. So with that, I invite you to tune in next Saturday, July 1st, to our fourth episode, where we will explore the terrifying phenomenon of black-eyed children. But that is not all for this broadcast. I am sure that you are thirsty for some eeriness, and I would like to share a couple strange tales in order to help you get through to next weekend. I have found more purported encounters with pale crawler humanoids, a topic which was explored in our first episode, and I would like to share them with you tonight. I have tried to pick reports that have some veracity, and as far as I can tell, each one I will be sharing tonight is presented as true. But as always, it is up to you to decide how much credence you put in these eyewitness accounts. Our first report comes from an individual going by the moniker MM on phantomsandmonsters.com, who relays their chilling encounter as follows. Just wanted to share my experience. Please keep in mind, my experience happened 5 to 6 years ago now. I spent the night at my ex's place in a very rural small town outside of New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, called Westville. We were up very late watching UFC, probably 1 a.m., and I went into the back bedroom of the house on the second floor, and happened to have glanced out the window towards the backyard. His backyard was long and rectangular in shape and had an embankment that sloped down to a tree line at the end of the yard, which was nothing but woods from beyond that point. When looking out the window, I noticed something very pale white crawling through the tree line. It immediately caught my eye and I kept staring at it. I called my ex at the time to come in and look. We both got really quiet and we came to realize that we weren't witnessing a creature that either of us could recognize. It was human-like in form, very skinny, purely pale, and crouched forward with very long arms, and would make a few movements forwards toward the yard and then back deeper into the woods again. We had horrible phones back then at the time. I had an old BlackBerry and his was no better, and they both couldn't record what our eyes were seeing in the pitch black of night in the country. The only thing I could think of to do at this time was to call my older brother who has an interest in paranormal topics. I called him and described to him everything that we were seeing, and to this day he doesn't disbelieve my accounts in any fashion. Something I said over and over to him on the phone was, "It's not moving like a human. Its movements are really strange. They were almost spastic in nature, nothing natural or orderly that I could make sense of compared to how other mammals move. It made no noise that I could hear through the window. I was terrified but watched this thing crawl around for a solid 2 hours. Years later, my brother found the more popular YouTube video now of the crawler in the backyard of some guy's house, and he calls his preacher. That was so scarily similar to my experience that I got full chills, goosebumps, and started to cry. It really hit me and solidified that we weren't somehow losing it or making it up, that we actually saw, with our own eyes, a crawler that night. What that man recorded is exactly what I saw a few years back, so even though I'm only one person, I 100% can say that it is the most legit video of a crawler on YouTube. I would like to inject momentarily and mention that I am familiar with the video the witness is referring to, and have left a link to it in our show notes if you would like to take a look. And now back to the report. Something else that was also really messed up about my experience that I have zero explanation for is that the crawler could be seen down on the left-hand side, crawling around the tree line, but for a few moments we saw a glowing deep yellow orb floating between the tree line as well. I'm wondering if there are any other accounts like this. As I've mentioned in my story, this was an ex and we are no longer together, so I have no idea if he continued living there or ever saw such a sight again in his backyard. I've always been curious if it's still out there, and I often think about my experience as I can recall it in high detail like it was yesterday. I'll never forget what I saw until the day I die. This next story comes from another individual on Phantoms and Monsters, going by HP, who says this. This incident occurred in western Idaho. This account comes from a very close family friend of my grandpa. His name is Neil. He's the kind of person that wouldn't lie about something like this, and I honestly believe his story. This story was told while I was on a hunting trip with my grandpa, father, a few of my uncles, Neil, and one or two other people. I don't know exactly how the conversation led to talking about strange and unknown things seen in the wild, but here we were. This was a few years ago, so forgive me if I've forgotten some of the details. I would like to momentarily interject and clarify that the remainder of the tale is told from the perspective of Neil, with a couple of parenthetical statements from the poster. A few years back, parentheses, he described it to be about the early 1990s, parentheses, me and one of my friends had gotten permission to go and hunt jackrabbits on another one of my friend's properties, out in a very remote part of western Idaho. Parentheses, I can't remember exactly where, but they had come an hour or two from the Weiser area inn. Parentheses. The property was out in the middle of the desert, quite far from any small town or city. We entered on the north side of the property over a cattle guard and through a gate. The property was kind of in a valley and was divided into a very large flat plain mostly on one half, and then on the other was a very large hill that spanned the length of the private land. It had an elevation of probably 200 to 300 feet, give or take. That night, we had been working the flatter part of the land with the spotlight on my truck and flashlights in hand, shooting the rabbits. It was a clear night and the moon was probably 3/4 of the way full, so it was relatively easy to see some elements of the property by the moonlight. We started a little after dusk, and by this time it was about midnight, and we were about 2/3 down the length of the property when we heard this inhuman, blood-curdling scream come from the eastern side of where the hill ran. I looked at my friend and we both froze. We were at the truck using the spotlight looking for rabbits when it happened. We were probably 200 to 300 yards from the base of the hill, so the top of the hill was probably another 100 yards or so from the base to the top. As I started to scan the hillside with my scope, the creature screamed again. I then followed the sound and saw a tall, lanky humanoid figure standing with the upper half of its body silhouetted against the sky at the top of the hill. I had fired a shot towards it from my .22, knowing it wouldn't make it to the creature, but I wanted to try and get it to move up and over the hill so I could get a better look at it. But instead, this thing started moving down the hill towards us. Right after that happened, we booked it to the closest side of the property, found a gate, shot the lock off, and drove away from there as fast as we could. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but it scared the daylights out of me. Our final report tonight comes from the website mysteriesofcanada.com. The author relays a witness's encounter with a creature aptly referred to as a crawler. This article is a bit longer, and I must say I found the information to be compelling. It begins as follows. A few weeks ago, a northern Canadian man named Don Herbert shared his own crawler sighting with this author. Herbert is a miner who hails from the remote town of Hay River, Northwest Territories, located on the southern shores of Great Slake Lake. He works in bi-weekly rotations, spending 2 weeks at the mine followed by 2 weeks off at home. One night in mid-August 2018, during his annual summer vacation about a week prior to his scheduled return to work, Herbert found himself alone in his truck driving through the woods on the Northwest Territories Highway 2, more commonly known as the Hay River Highway. This stretch of road is one of the most remote thoroughfares in all of Canada, beginning on the shores of Great Slake Lake and skirting the western bank of the Hay River before joining the Mackenzie Highway 38 kilometers to the south. Drowsy, road-weary, and anxious to get home, Don was a few miles from town when a pale figure appeared in his truck's headlights, crouching on all fours in the ditch on the left-hand side of the road. From wolves to wolverines, Don had encountered plenty of animals during nighttime drives through the boreal wilderness. But this creature was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Its skin was grayish-white and completely hairless. Its head, which he estimated to be only slightly smaller than his own, was bald and didn't appear to have any ears. Aside from a pair of dark eyes, its only facial feature was a cruel-looking, beak-like mouth. Its legs were long and spindly and appeared to taper sharply towards the feet, which were obscured by long grass. The creature, which impressed Dawn as being highly intelligent, appeared to notice him in the driver's seat. Baring its beak-like teeth, it crouched slightly, dug in with its front legs, and launched itself at Dawn's truck, leaving a small cloud of dust in its wake. Instead of slamming into the side of the vehicle as its course indicated it was likely to, the creature turned deftly on the side of the road and loped alongside the truck. Alarmed, Dawn stepped on the gas and raced for home, leaving the frightening creature behind in the gloom of the forest. In the months that followed his horrifying encounter, Dawn spent his free time attempting to identify and track down the strange animal that he saw, secretly fearing that it was a demon. The following is Don Herbert's own account of his search for the mysterious crawler, lightly edited by this author for the purposes of concision and continuity, which he has generously allowed us to publish for the first time in this article. This is Don Herbert's account. During that remaining week, I did not return to the location of the encounter with the creature. More specifically, I could not return to the location. I was now absolutely terrified to do so. Even in daylight, no chance. Around this time, things were starting to sink in, and I started to notice some fundamental changes starting to happen with my behavior. I reside in town, and my house faces the Hay River. The house itself is set back a ways from the street, resulting in a fairly long driveway of maybe 30 feet or so. I can walk across the street in front of my home and access a nature trail that follows the river. On the other side of the river is wilderness, save for a gravel road that provides access to a First Nations reserve. Directly behind my home there is a green area as well. A couple of days after the incident, I was taking my garbage to the curb after dark. There is a street lamp across the street, so it wasn't entirely pitch black. However, as I was carrying my garbage can to the curb, I felt a sense of nervousness starting to develop. It became worse the closer I got to the woods on the opposite side of the street at the end of the driveway. As I progressed to the street, I couldn't help but to continue to scan the tree line on the opposite side of the road in both directions, watching for any signs of movement. After I placed my garbage can at the street, I could not bring myself to turn my back to the darkened woods out of a deep sense of fear. To return to the house, I backstepped the length of the driveway, keeping a close eye on the tree line until I reached the front end of my truck, which was parked in the driveway. Only then did I turn around to make the final distance onto my front deck, then into my house with my back to the woods. I knew then and there that the encounter with the creature had affected me more than I cared to admit. Up until that point, I was trying my hardest to put the incident out of my mind and continue on as normal. I did not want to even start thinking about it. Every time my thoughts wandered back to it, I would try thinking of something else entirely. I didn't even want to begin and try to form an opinion. I was hoping I could just forget about the encounter altogether and simply move on. Well, let's just say that's easier said than done. When I got back into my house after putting the trash out, I sat down on the couch. I realized at that moment in time that there was no way I was going to be able to avoid confronting the subject. The simple fact of the matter was, those 4 to 5 seconds on the highway that night had changed my life forever, whether I tried to continue to deny it to myself or not. And so it began. I asked myself the one question I was trying my absolute best to avoid from the very moment I passed by that creature and the encounter ended. What in the heck was that? I returned to work for my 2-week rotation shortly after that. I started to tell the story to as many people as I could in the hopes that someone may have had a similar story or shared a similar experience. I wondered if I'd had a hallucination. I surfed the web for images similar to the creature I had seen. I read reports of sightings of strange creatures in the hope that someone out there may have experienced a similar encounter. I was sincerely hoping to find a natural explanation for what I'd seen. When I started looking for information on the creature, there were only 2 options at this point that I really cared to entertain. The first and most probable in my mind was that I had experienced a hallucination of some sort. What confused me most about this theory was that I had not only seen the creature, but I had heard it as well. The experience just seemed too real. The second option was that I had perhaps witnessed a species of animal never before seen or reported. This is where I was officially introduced to the world of cryptozoology. Now don't get me wrong, I was not totally ignorant of the cryptid world prior to this encounter. In fact, I probably possess more knowledge about the subject than most average people. I currently prospect the Nahanni region, and earlier in life spent 2 seasons placer mining on the Liard River, just a ways upriver from its confluence with the South Nahanni. You can't research the area from a geological perspective in a search for minerals, or frequent the region without becoming aware of the mysteries surrounding the area. I have always tried to keep an open mind about things, but the moment of my encounter was the first time I actually thought that some of the stories I've read and some of the tales I've heard over the years could potentially have some measure of truth to them. Frustrated by his inability to identify the creature, the incredulity of his coworkers, and his newfound fear of the wilderness which infringed upon his lifelong love of outdoor recreation, Don resolved to find the creature and kill it. I returned from work on the evening of September 4th, 2018, arriving home at just after 8 p.m. As we were landing at the airport, the sun was just starting to dip below the horizon. Tim, a friend I work with, who was also on the flight, kindly offered me a lift home from the airport. Tim was the first person to whom I had relayed the story of my encounter. I had been very anxious to speak with him 2 weeks earlier, as I waited for the flight to the mine. In the past, Tim has both hunted and trapped to make a living. He has extensive knowledge of the subject. I thought that if anyone would have seen or heard of anything like this creature, it would be him. When Tim dropped me off at home, he was then heading to his own home and family. They reside on an acreage about 10 minutes south of town in the direction of where I saw the creature. Tim's family also owns a secluded cottage along the Hay River near the Alberta-NWT border. And as such, they spend a lot of time on the highway traveling back and forth, passing the location where I had seen the creature. Tim knew I was intending on trying to find the track that evening and wished me luck. When he dropped me off at home, I quite literally tossed my bags inside the door of my home, got in my truck, and proceeded to head out on the highway to where the encounter with the creature had taken place. At this point in time, the encounter was all I could think about. It was very quickly becoming an obsession, if indeed it hadn't already. Before I could even begin to move forward, I had to find the answer to one fundamental question. Did it leave any tracks? Visions and spirits and hallucinations do not leave physical tracks. 3 weeks had now elapsed since the encounter. I didn't feel I had much chance of success in finding any tracks in the ditch where I first noticed the creature or on the shoulder of the highway where it approached me, as it had rained a few times in the 2 weeks I was at work. I was hoping beyond hope that I was not already too late. Even with the sun now below the horizon and darkness fast approaching, I had to go. I could not take the chance of one more minute of time elapsing before I had the opportunity to find that sign. I felt my very sanity now hinged on finding that one, single, particular track on the shoulder of the highway. This was not only a search for a strange creature, but also an attempt to confirm that I wasn't on the path of early dementia or beginning to lose grip on reality. On the drive out, I was trying to reconcile the fact that this could go 2 ways. The first was that if I found the tracks, it would mean the creature is real. The second was, if I didn't find the tracks, it would mean that I'm losing my mind. Neither option was very appealing. It was not the most pleasant drive, to say the least. I slowed as I approached the area the encounter took place, and there it was. The skid mark the creature had left, just where I thought it would be. I parked on the side of the road about 20 feet from the track. I got out with my iPhone on record to get some video I could look at later. I was not stepping 1 foot off the pavement, however. I scanned the area with my phone as long as I dared and got the heck back in the truck and started heading back to town. I had to get Tim. That was all I could think of as I drove back to Tim's place 10 minutes away, hoping that I could get him to take a look at the track before dark. I could not stop myself from imposing on Tim, who had just returned to his family after 2 weeks. I just had to get Tim. Tim was gracious enough to come out with me and examine the track. He offered his opinion that it looked similar to a goat track, but since the track was at least 3 weeks old, you would never be able to tell for sure. This would be unusual, as goats are not known in the region. As Tim was now with me, I managed to summon the courage to now actually step off the pavement and have a look in the ditch where I first spotted the creature. In the dim light, I could tell something had left signs of activity, but the signs were only faintly visible due to their age. I also followed the path it took up the ditch towards the gravel shoulder and found its approach tracks as well. We didn't spend a great deal of time investigating the tracks due to the failing light, and soon headed back home. It was dark as I dropped Tim back off at home. The tree line across from my driveway was dark as I returned home to the couch. I had some thoughts to process and a heart to get back in my chest. While having my coffee the next morning, I decided to try out a new hobby and become an amateur cryptozoologist. I intended to approach the hunt for the creature in a scientific manner, the best I could, and let the experts come to their own conclusions based on any evidence I could gather. Finding the track made me confident that I was dealing with an animal. My former anger subsided into fascination. I decided to set out to prove that this thing exists. Don Herbert began his investigation at an abandoned gravel pit located about a mile from the site of his encounter. The area was perpetually crisscrossed with animal tracks, and Don hoped that the mysterious creature might leave some sign of its presence there. For nearly 2 weeks, he checked the site every morning for fresh prints. On the 12th day, his diligence was rewarded. There, in the frost-encrusted soil, were 2 pairs of strange animal tracks which he interpreted as belonging to a mother and her offspring. Herbert reasoned that the presence of a young one might explain the creature's hostile reaction on the highway. Perhaps the creature had been attempting to chase him off or direct his attention away from her progeny. Herbert proceeded to search for the creature's den in the woods near the site of his encounter, on the side of the highway closest to the river, reasoning that the creature's hairlessness was an indication that it hibernated during the winter. During his search, he came across several more of the strange prints. These tracks often appeared in the vicinity of wolf tracks, which Don took as an indication that the creature is a scavenger which subsists on the leavings of predators. On September 17, 2018, Don Herbert discovered the outlet of an old drainage culvert which was covered with fresh vegetation, as if someone or something had attempted to conceal it. He suspected that this might be the creature's den, and set up game cameras to monitor the entrance. When the cameras failed to yield any interesting footage, Don crawled into the culvert and found it empty and unusually clean. Don Herbert assured this author that he fully intends to continue the search for the mysterious creature, which he believes to be an undiscovered species of terrestrial origin, and has agreed to furnish this author with any updates on his progress. As I mentioned, I find this account to be very fascinating and one of the best and most detailed reports of a crawler sighting that I have ever read. Something else this article contains that gives it more weight are various pictures that Don Herbert sent to the author. These pictures purportedly show some of the tracks that Herbert documented while searching for the mysterious creature. The author also relays some information regarding nature experts and trackers who weighed in with their opinions on what the tracks could be, and the author themselves also ventures forth some hypotheses of their possible origins, although they make it clear they are not experts in that field. Essentially, one of the tracks is confidently described as being a wolf track, while the others are unknown. It should be noted that it was postulated that the creature scavenges in proximity to wolf scraps, so the presence of these tracks seems reasonable, and given the description of the entity, it seems unlikely that it was a misidentified wolf. As with all my show sources, I have included a link to this article in the show notes, and would encourage you to take a look and see these tracks for yourself, as I could not do justice in describing them here. I would love for you to share your thoughts regarding these tracks and tonight's topic at large through our social media. In closing tonight's episode, I would like to give some of my own thoughts in regards to the crawler phenomenon. Many people will outright dismiss the countless eyewitness reports of these creatures as hoaxes, given their similarity to various expressly fictional creatures spawned in the more dim corners of the internet. I will say that in my research into such topics, the presence of wild humanoid entities living outside the throes of society is a trope that has repeated itself throughout many cultures and eras. I feel like the propagation of such entities in modern internet-driven folklore cannot be interpreted as the origin of the archetype for such creatures, but rather an extension of it. Something that has spread that description to a wider group of people. It is understood that as with many topics related to paranormal or cryptozoological phenomena, there are many individuals who create and circulate hoax stories for attention. But I do believe that many individuals who relay reports of purported encounters with unidentified humanoid entities did see something. Something that has changed their perceptions of the world around them. Now I will say that I have a possible theory in regards to what some of these entities may be, as I do not believe that every creature reported with this description is one singular type of entity. In my research into strange and mysterious phenomena, I have repeatedly come across reports and stories of individuals or groups of feral humans living in the wilderness. It does not seem out of the question to think that in some remote parts of the forests and wildlands, there are people who have become so removed from society and human contact that they have reverted to something wholly beast-like. Of course, this could only go towards explaining sightings deep in the wilderness, as it is tough to imagine such people living within close proximity to urban areas. In any case, it seems as though there probably is not one solid explanation as to what witnesses are reporting, and this is just one theory. I would be interested to know your thoughts and theories on the subject. I would like to thank you for tuning in to tonight's channel update, and hope that the strange tales I have relayed helped to quench your thirst for the mysterious and spooky. As previously mentioned, we will have our next regularly scheduled episode out July 1st, and hope you will join us to hear about the chilling phenomenon of black-eyed children. I have left links to our social media in the show notes and encourage you to like and follow us on all applicable platforms. Not only does this help you stay caught up on updates, it helps to raise awareness of the show. If you know anyone who has a hankering for the paranormal and unexplained, please share the show with them as well. Make sure you lock your doors and windows tonight, as you never know what entities may be lurking in the shadows just outside the comfort of your shelter. This has been your host, Chance, and I'm signing off.